So good to have you here for our unit on Saul and the kings coming into play after the judges. So it's kind of an interesting and sometimes troubling narrative. Seems to be a pattern there, but let's start with the opening prayer on page 15 in your workbook. Almighty and eternal God, although you made all things and fill all things, you once came among us in the person of your Son, Jesus the Messiah. Help us to understand that the dreams of your people of old are reflected in the delusions of some people still today. Remind us that your Son did not seek to live in a palace, to dress in soft robes, or to be seated on a throne of gold. He was born in a simple home, walked the way of a servant, sought the company of the helpless and hopeless, and was finally enthroned on a cross. We thank and praise you for gathering us into his strange but wondrous eternal kingdom. We thank you for inviting us to strive for joy in weakness rather than for pride in power. We ask these things in the name of the King of Kings, who gave his all so that we might know the joy of belonging to his eternal royal family. Amen. So let's look at the review points from last unit on the judges on page 36 in your text. And we have this picture here. If someone wants to read 13a.
Passages, go ahead. Okay. Passages in Joshua, Judges, and Deuteronomy describe the division of the land among the tribes who settled in the regions to the east and west of the Jordan River. Judges also describes counterattacks and raids by the Moabites, the Canaanites, the Midianites, the Ammonites, and the Philistines.
All right. So here's this kind of picture of the promised land with the different colors for the different tribes, and it's not always clear exactly where they are, but this is kind of an approximation. And you see the various places where these foreign and or local groups would raise up battles. And of course, the big picture up in the upper left is with a farmer threshing out grain in the front of a very large, overly large goddess, kind of indicating that the trouble was seen as they settled into the land. They got involved in the worship of those Canaanite deities, and so we have this rather unhappy story, quite different than Joshua. And let's look at point 13b that talks about one of those differences.
Judges suggest that because the Israelites did not completely eliminate the Canaanites from the promised land, they intermarried with them and worshiped their gods.
Yep, there's your problem. And then there is the next one.
The Israelites sought to deal with the problems they confronted within the land under the charismatic leadership of judges, military leaders, and national saviors. Judges refers to 12 such leaders. 4 of these were raised up when the Spirit of the Lord came upon them.
Okay, and then this interesting pattern, 13d.
Each narrative reflects a similar framework. Apostasy, the people sin. Battering, God uses neighboring nations to discipline his people. Cry, Israel cries to the Lord for help. Deliverance, God raises up a judge to deliver the Israelites.
And then as you can see on the screen, I add an E, make it even more alphabetical because everything starts all back over again once they get with the time of the judges. So 13E just lifts up particular judges, Ehud, Deborah, Barak, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson. So those were some of the ones that have a little more narrative to them. Sometimes you simply get a line that says so-and-so was a judge, and that's, you don't hear much about anything. 13F.
Judges 17 to 21 contain 2 narratives that do not concern themselves with rule by judges,
but with events and conditions of the period. The origin of the shrine at Dan, chapter 17 and 18, how 600 Benjaminites obtained wives after their tribe was all but wiped out.
Yeah, so there are some interesting narratives, just like we saw in Joshua, that Joshua is not all about the conquest. There's just 5 of those chapters, really, 6 if you count parts of chapters that talk about how they occupied the land. Lots of talking about the division of the land. So in Judges, we hear about the different tribes going up to try and claim their territory and control their area, and then the various judges that were raised up in response to the problems they were facing from oppressive groups. And then you get some of these other stories that sort of set the stage for information we'll hear about later on as we go through the narrative. And then, as we looked at a little bit at the end, the final chapters in the book of Judges really lift up some not pleasant stories at all. And that's what 13G kind of picks up about. So somebody can read that final section.
Throughout the period of the Judges, the Israelites had to deal with a number of issues. The persistent hostility of neighboring nations, internal needs, dangers posed by the worship of false gods, adapting from life as nomadic animal herders to life as settled grain growers, the impact their behavior had on whether they experienced blessing or curse, the lack of cohesion among the tribes, suggestions that there is a transition from rule by judges to rule by kings. The people became increasingly aware that if they wished to secure a meaningful life within the promised land, they needed to establish political unity, dynastic continuity, and spiritual purity.
Okay. And that kind of, I didn't have this picture ready, I think, last time, did I? Or did I show it to you? So, yeah. So here's your souvenir coffee mug from the period of the Judges, if you'd like. That apparently one of my pastor friends, when I heard we were studying the Judges, says, "Oh, let me show you my coffee mug." And this is actually related at the end of Proverbs. The final verses in Proverbs talk about this wonderful woman. And so that's sort of stuck there. So it's really kind of 2 pictures put in place. But anyway, kind of fun. So, well, we moved then, and we, even though, excuse me, we'll pick up on Ruth a little bit later as well. We included Ruth just because we needed something to salve, some nice story to kind of rub over some of the painful literature that we had worked our way through in a couple of the previous units. And as you get a chance to read through Samuel, you'll see that the labor continues as we work our way through. But so, excuse the cough. We are now in this next section of the former prophets, and we're going to spend time in this unit and the next one looking at the narrative in what we now call 1st and 2nd Samuel. Your chapter pointed out that originally they were one book, but when the Old Testament got translated into Greek, it got separated into 2. And so we'll spend some time there, but the Samuel, and then we'll be going from there into the Kings. And so this is the end of this section of the former prophets that's going to occupy our attention over the next several lessons together. So just in terms of timeline, again, we're working our way through, and we covered this first part of the timeline before, and now here we were in this period of the Judges between roughly 1200 and 1000 BC. And we'll be ending now with this final reference to Samuel and Saul, who's going to become the first of the kings. So again, you look at the Judges are in just black numbers. They are back up here. And Joshua is actually considered the first of the Judges, and Samuel is the last of the Judges. So he's number 14. And then we get to the kings of the United Monarchy, and that is black boxes with white numbers: Saul, David, Solomon. So those are a little bit of where we're headed as we go forward. But because we're going to spend a lot of our time in the narrative here, we're going to pick up and look instead at the text. So let's turn to Samuel. Once again, we have more material than we can possibly hope to read every verse as we work our way through, but let's look at and just so you're aware, the question book, the workbook, actually does a pretty good job of going section by section by section by section. We're not going to use that directly there as we do that, but we'll try to spend most of our time in the text. But if you want to turn ahead to pages 39 and following, we're going to jump in and look at some of these texts in more detail, but just a little bit of an overview as it points out on page 39 that reference already was originally one book. And the very final verse in the book of Judges reads as follows. There was no king in those days. There was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. And that's sort of one of those statements that actually, this is the fourth time that reference comes that there's no king. That you're getting the sense that the writer is suggesting that the problems they are facing have to do with the fact that they don't have a strong, centralized leader. And what happens as we move from Judges into Samuel is we will see the development of a strong, centralized leader. And as you're probably already aware in the story, the answer will not be in having a strong, centralized leader, but sometimes we people think we're pretty smart and we know what we want. And not just in Bible times, but all across human history, God sometimes lets us have what we want. And then later on, we come to realize that what may not have always been the best for us. But as we'll kind of work through this narrative, we'll get there. And it is interesting in that third paragraph from the top, where it talks about the narrative. Notice the word two, TWO, shows up 4 times, because we will have several accounts of how Saul became king. There's 2 accounts of Samuel rejecting Saul. We're going to read 2 accounts of David being introduced to Saul, 2 accounts of David trying to escape from Saul, and 2 accounts of David sparing Saul's life. So there are some repetitions there that occur as we work our way through. And a very rough outline of the opening chapters is printed on page 39. And so let's jump in and look at 1 Samuel, and we'll read through chapter 1 as sort of, again, the setting of the stage. Would someone read verses 1 through 8? And again, remember, you're free to pronounce or just mention first letters.
There was a man named E who lived in Ramah in the region of Zuph, in the hill country of Ephraim. He was the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, son of Ephraim.
Elkanah.
Had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. Each year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of Heaven's armies at the tabernacle. The priests of the Lord at that time were 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. On the day that Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to Peninnah and each of her children. And though he loved Hannah, he would only give her one choice portion, because the Lord had given her no children. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children. Year after year, it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not even eat. Why are you crying, Hannah? Elkanah would ask. Why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons?
All right. So we once again have a narrative in which children, or lack thereof, is causing stress in a family, right? This is a sort of a constant biblical pattern and one that's often true to life, huh? And so you have a man with two wives. One could say, well, now we know what the problem is to start with. There you go, right? But anyway, it sets the stage for this stress and strain. And one wonders, after reading just these few verses, why anybody would name a daughter Hannah, because she's getting picked on, right? Well, of course, that's not where it ends up. So somebody pick up and read 9 through 18.
After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made this vow, O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, how long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourselves? Put away your wine. But Hannah answered, no, my lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time. Then Eli answered, go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your sight. Then the woman went to her quarters, ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer.
I sometimes say, if I were ever in a position to teach about pastoral care, this would be one of the chapters that you could use, because Eli makes a bad assumption, doesn't he? When he sees her so distressed, he just assumes she's drunk and chews her out for that. But it is interesting, a couple things. And Liz, I'm curious, let's see here. How does your Bible translate the end of verse 8? What's that structure called?
At the verse 8.
Yeah.
You have me, isn't that?
Or 9, sorry.
Okay. Eli the priest was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle.
Okay. So what's interesting is that the word tabernacle is never used in this text. Nobody knows for sure what that structure is, but some Bibles will translate it tabernacle so that you don't get too caught up in the confusion of what is that thing, because it's called house of the Lord, temple of the Lord, tent, and tabernacle is never used, but sometimes that will get thrown in there as a way of just trying to say, don't worry about it, it's a minor detail. But it is rather interesting that you've got this structure in Shiloh. Eli is the leading priest there, and people will go up there to offer sacrifices, but we don't really know what it is. The other thing that's interesting, perhaps you noticed in the vow that she made as she was wanting this child to make him a Nazirite, that was the same kind of thing that Samson was committed to, right? That he would not shave his head, that he would have no strong drink. And so, but here she's kind of making this little deal with God, right? I really want a baby, really want a baby, really want a baby. And if you give me a baby, I'll give him back to you. So we do find these kinds of things in there, even though that's not the sort of piety that God's trying to draw out from us. But at the end now, she has comforted and is feeling more at peace. And somebody finished the chapter. 19 to the end.
They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. In due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel. She said, I have asked him of the Lord. So the man Elkanah and all his household went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him, that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and remain there forever. I will offer him as a Nazarite for all time. Her husband Elkanah said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him only. Only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. When she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. She brought him to the house of the Lord of Shiloh, and the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as you live with my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me the petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is given to the Lord. She left him there for the Lord.
Okay. So this resolution of childlessness gets resolved, and in this instance, the child is dedicated to God. Samuel means God hears. That's what the name, you probably have a footnote in there. So we have now set the stage, and then comes this wonderful prayer of Hannah, which if you are familiar with the song associated to Mary, as at her Annunciation, there are many, many parallels there. So somebody else pick up and read the first 10 verses of chapter 2.
Hannah prayed and said, my heart exults in the Lord, my strength is exalted in my God. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in my victory. Here, there is no one like the Lord, no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry are fat with spoil. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts from the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seal of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. And he will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might does one prevail. The Lord, his adversaries shall be shattered. The Most High will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed.
So a strong, robust prayer on the lips of a woman. So we do get some of those as we work our way through the scriptures. Verse 11 simply says, then they went home and the boy got left behind. So now we have Samuel working in the care of Eli. And the contrast is made immediately about Eli's own sons, right? I'll read. It says, now the sons of Eli, verse 12, were scoundrels. They had no regard for the Lord, for the duties of the priests to the people. When anyone offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling with a 3-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the one who was sacrificing, give meat for the priest to roast. He will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw. And if the man said to him, let them burn the fat first and then take whatever you wish, he would say, no, you must give it now. If not, I will take it by force. Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for they treated the offerings of the Lord with contempt. So we won't have to go into Levitical detail, but if you spend some time looking at how the sacrifices were supposed to be apportioned, a portion of the sacrifices were given over to the priests and those working in the tabernacle and later into the temple as part of their wages. Some of you may recall in older times, it was not uncommon for families to bring food to give to the pastor or to the pastor's family. It was a part of the, it's part of the old vestiges of that it, particularly in agricultural and farming communities, that was and sometimes still is a common practice that I'll bring it. I was smile when the hunters bring me some of the spoils of their efforts, but here they were despising, and so you've got this contrast. Here's Samuel coming in to a situation that's not so good. Well, let's take somebody pick up in verse 18 and read through 21, and then I'll pause for just a minute before I have you continue.
Samuel was ministering before the Lord, boy wearing a linen ephod. Each year his mother made him a little robe and took it to him when she went up with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice. Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, saying, may the Lord give you children by this woman to take the place of the one she prayed for and gave to the Lord. Then they would go home. And the Lord was gracious to Hannah. She gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord.
Okay, so the sad situation with Hannah ends up in a more happy one at the end, huh? And but Mama would still, make a little something to bring along to him each and every year so that he had the clothing needed. And of course, most of us think now, how would one garment a year manage to suffice for a growing child? But anyhow, keep going, because we're also going to hear about how Eli's sons are in, what's that?
When you grew up like I did.
Well, maybe.
You got one pair of jeans that last you for the year.
Yeah. My mother tells me she had one pair of overalls for church and another pair she could wear for work during the week. So, all right, keep going then.
Now Eli, who was very old, heard about everything his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they slept with the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So he said to them, why do you do such things? I hear from all the people about these wicked deeds of yours. No, my sons, the report I hear spreading among the Lord's people is not good. If one person sins against another, God may mediate for the offender. But if anyone sins against the Lord, who will intercede for them? His sons, however, did not listen to their father's rebuke, for it was the Lord's will to put them to death. And the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with people. Keep going.
Well, so again, Samuel's or Eli's sons, we're going to find out later, Samuel's sons are no good either. That's part of the pattern here. But Eli's sons are being reprimanded by their father and they're blowing him off. But Samuel is on a good path. Go ahead, finish the chapter.
Now a man of God came to Eli and said to him, this is what the Lord says. Did I not clearly reveal myself to your ancestors' family when they were in Egypt under Pharaoh? I chose your ancestor out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod in my presence. I also gave your ancestors' family all the food offerings presented by the Israelites. Why do you scorn my sacrifice and offering that I prescribed for my dwelling? Why do you honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choice parts of every offering made by the people of Israel? Therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that members of your family would minister before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me. Those who honor me, I will honor, but those who despise me will be despised. The time is coming when I will cut short your strength and the strength of your priestly house, so that no one in it will reach old age, and you will see distress in my dwelling. Although good will be done to Israel, no one in your family line will ever reach old age. Every one of you that I do not cut off from serving at my altar, I will spare only to destroy your sight and sap your strength. And all your descendants will die in the prime of life. And what happens to your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, will be assigned to you. They will both die on the same day. I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is my heart and mind. I will firmly establish his priestly house, and they will minister before my anointed one always. Then everyone left in the family line, will come and bow down before him for a piece of silver and a loaf of bread and plead, appoint me to some priestly office so I can have food to eat.
Well, not the kind of curse that you want spoken, right? If you use your power for personal gain, as we hear about here, that power will be stripped and there will be severe consequences coming, and God is going to raise someone else up. We'll see that same kind of pattern happen when we get with Saul and David as well in the narrative. So the stage is set then for why this boy Samuel is in the place. And chapter 3, of course, becomes his call. Probably very familiar with that. Someone read 1 through 9, chapter 3.
Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim, so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel. And he said, Here I am, and ran to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call. Lie down again. So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call, my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again, a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place.
So that opening line of chapter 3 talking about the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There'll be a prophet later on who will talk about a famine for hearing the word of the Lord. And you wonder whether it was it that God wasn't speaking much, or was it that the people weren't listening? And that question's never fully resolved here. But interesting that Samuel is being taught these quote unquote priestly duties, but he's described here as not yet knowing the Lord. And you wonder what's going on. Clearly, whatever's happening with Eli, he's losing it. Whatever good he had at one point is diminishing quickly, and his sons, of course, are clearly not going to be the successors to this. Keep reading.
And the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. And the Lord said to Samuel, See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli and all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I have told him that I am about to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever. Samuel lay there until morning. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. He said, Here I am. Eli said, What was it that he told you? Do not hide it from me. May God do so to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all that he told you. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. Then he said, It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him. As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel at Shiloh by the word of the Lord. And the word of Samuel came to all Israel.
All right, so notice here how Samuel is referred to as a prophet. So we're starting to get some of these titles put in place. He's going to be a judge, but he's also the kind of the first of the prophets. But we've had at least named prophets. We had this other nameless prophet, man of God, come to Eli and tell him about the bad things that were going to occur because his sons were there. And you think about it, I don't know exactly how old the guy is at this point, but here's this young boy given this rather awful message about how this this words of destruction are going to come to play out, and he's not quite sure what he's going to do with them until Eli rather threatens him and says, well, if you don't tell me, let those bad things happen to you. Okay, here it is. But it's not this is not pleasant bedtime reading, right? Even though it's about a boy. And now so that sets the stage of Samuel, and Samuel is on the rise as an important character. We will circle back to some of these Samuel texts when we get to Jesus, because some of the way the child Jesus and the boy Jesus are described are echoes of what we hear about him growing in favor and inside of God and humanity and things like that. But the narrative shifts now to focus in on the ark, and it will still include Eli's sons and that, but what happens beginning in chapter 4 is put the picture up here quick. The Philistines, right? And I think I've shared with you before, a lot of, so you think about George Lucas and you think of the Star Wars saga, right? Gene Roddenberry, that name rings a bell to you. That's your Star Trek saga. And I'm absolutely convinced that Roddenberry, who I believe was Jewish, would have used the Philistines as his inspiration for the Klingons, right? So whenever I think of the Klingons and the Philistines, I think of these aren't warlike looking enough, but these are the Philistines who are the enemies that show up in the story now, and they will be a part of the story for some time. Okay, so they're the if you will, the baddies on the block. So we're told in chapter 4 that the Philistines mustered for war against Israel, and Israel went out to fight against them. And they camped at Ebenezer, rock of my help, while the Philistines camped at Aphek. Okay, so somebody pick up verse 2, chapter 4, read through verse 9.
The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle was joined, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men on the field of battle. When the troops came to the camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord put us to rout today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, so that he may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh and brought from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. The two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. When the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout, so that the earth resounded. When the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, "What does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" When they learned that the ark of the Lord had come to the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "Gods have come into the camp." They also said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us! Who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness. Take courage and be men, O Philistines, in order not to become slaves to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight.
Okay, so here again, just like when Joshua led the people across the Jordan and they came to Jericho, the word on the street was, remember, God did these horrible things to the Egyptians. So that's narrative is still out there, and the Philistines are terrified because here comes the ark, right? But keep going.
So the Philistines fought. Israel was defeated, and they fled, everyone to his home. There was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. The ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died.
And remember, that was the prophecy that the two sons would die the same day. Keep going.
A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and with earth upon his head. When he arrived, Eli was sitting upon his seat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. When the man came into the city and told the news, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" Then the man came quickly and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. The man said to Eli, "I have just come from the battle. I fled from the battle today." He said, "How did it go, my son?" The messenger replied, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great slaughter among the troops. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for he was an old man and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years.
All right, so there you go. Kind of the end story for Eli and his family is not good, and there's a little sad footnote to follow. Keep going.
Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. When she heard the news that the ark of God was captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth. For her labor pains overwhelmed her. As she was about to die, the women attending her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer or give heed. She named the child Ichabod, meaning the glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. She said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God is captured."
There you go. So that's why Ichabod is a bad name. Refers to God's glory going away. And of course, Nathaniel Hawthorne, as he would tell the story of Ichabod Crane, chose the name, fully aware of what that first name referred to. But so now you've got sort of the end story of Eli, right? Verse 18 says he judged Israel 40 years, which is that 40-year period is that, we get that pretty common length of time. So he judged for quite a while, but it's not a happy ending. And we also have this ongoing saga with the ark. So somebody pick up and here it almost has some humorous parts to it. Somebody read chapter 5.
After the Philistines captured the ark at Ebenezer, they took it from the battleground at Ebenezer to the city of Ashdod. They carried the ark of God into the temple of Dagon and placed it beside the idol of Dagon. But when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning, Dagon had fallen with his face to the ground in front of the ark of the Lord. So they set the idol up again. But the next morning, the same thing happened, and the idol had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again. This time, his head and hands had broken off and were lying in the doorway. Only the trunk of his body was left intact. That is why, to this day, neither the priests of Dagon nor anyone who steps near the temple of Dagon will step into his threshold. Then the Lord began to afflict the people of Ashdod and the nearby villages with a plague of tumors. When the people realized what was happening, they cried out, "We can't keep the ark of the God of Israel here any longer. He's against us. We will all be destroyed along with our god Dagon." So they called together and the rulers of the 5 Philistine cities and asked, "What should we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" The rulers discussed it and replied, "Move it to the city of God." So they moved the ark of God to Israel from Israel to God. But when the ark arrived at Gath, the Lord began afflicting his people, young and old, with the plague of tumors, and there was a great panic. So they sent the ark of God to the city of Ekron. But when the people of Ekron saw it coming, they cried out, "They are bringing us the ark of the God of Israel here to kill us too." So the people summoned the rulers again and begged them, "Please send the ark of the God of Israel back to its own country, or it will kill us all." For the plague from God had already begun, and a great fear was sweeping across the city. Those who didn't die were afflicted with tumors, and there was weeping everywhere.
Okay, and your Bible translation might use tumors, some use boils, and some even use hemorrhoids. So depending on how your Bible renders that phrase, it is sort of interesting. But so here the Philistines wiped out how many thousands of Israelites in battle? Right? Well, north of 30,000 people, isn't it? But single-handedly, the Ark of the Covenant is taking over these towns and causing fear and panic. And they recognize that, and you get this little bravado that in Ashdod, they were considered to be wimps. That's why the people of Gath said, "Well, we'll take it. You guys are just a bunch of babies." And once it happened to them, they couldn't get rid of it fast enough. And then when it went to Ekron, they said, "Don't bring it here, don't bring it here." And before they even decided to get rid of it completely, it had already started. And you'll see that perhaps some of the others, there's 5 Philistine cities that are referenced, and only 3 of them are mentioned here. But we're going to get the ark someplace else. So somebody pick up and read chapter 6 to start with. Take 1 through 18.
The ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. Then the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us what we should do. Tell us what should send with it to its place." They said, "If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty. But by all means, return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed and will be ransomed. Will not his hand then turn from you?" They said, "What is the guilt offering that we shall return to him?" They answered, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines, for the same plague was upon all of you and upon your lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand on you and your gods in your land. Why should you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? After he had made food with them, did they not let the people go, and they departed? Now then, get ready a new cart and 2 milk cows that have never borne a yoke, and yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home away from them. Take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put in a box at its side the figures of gold which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off and let it go its way. And watch, if it goes up the way to its own land, to Beersheba, then it is he who has done us this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by chance. The men did so. They took 2 milk cows and yoked them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. They put the ark of the Lord on the cart and the box of the gold mice and the images of the tumors. Cows went straight in the direction of their Shemesh along one highway. Lowering as they went, they turned neither to the right nor to the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of their Shemesh. Now the people of Beth-shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. When they looked up and saw the ark, they went with rejoicing to meet it. The cart came into the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh and stopped there. A large stone was there, so they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the box that was beside it, in which were the gold objects, and set them upon the large stone. Then the people of Bethshemesh offered burnt offerings and presented sacrifices on that day to the Lord. When the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron.
All right, I'll stop you there. So, they say, okay, we got to get this out of here. We got to send the ark back, but don't send it back empty. Put some kind of offering in it, admit that you were involved in some way, shape, or form with this. And then they kind of create this interesting test, don't they? They say, we're gonna yoke 2 milk cows to pull on a cart, which is that's not what cows do. Cows give milk. And but these are cows that have newly calved. And of course, I'm not a farmer, lived with farmers for a while. And all the cow cares about is being with the calf. And the cow is not interested in pulling a cart, but so they kind of set it up to say, let's find out, is this really God's hand at work, or did it just kind of happen, right? Is it some sort of weird, unpleasant coincidence? And what do those milk cows do? They head straight on without going one direction or the other on a straight shot back to Beth Shemesh and deliver that. And what is their reward? They get used as sacrifice when they arrive. And but the Philistines see this, and now they know for sure that it was God's hand at work. And the mice are sort of a new thing, because you didn't really hear anything about that. But apparently, in addition to the boils that were happening, whatever those boils or tumors or hemorrhoids were, there was some kind of infestation of mice that was being created as well. And then we get this interesting little phrase I'll read in verse 17. These are the gold tumors which the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to the Lord. One for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, one for Ekron. Also the gold mice, according to the number of the cities of Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages. The great stone, besides which they set down the ark of the Lord, is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. So again, that sense of still this is written afterwards, but remembering back to that. And then, interesting, it's not all pleasant, right? The descendants of Jeconiah did not rejoice with the people of Beth Shemesh when they greeted the ark of the Lord, and he killed 70 of them. The people mourned because the Lord had made such a great slaughter among the people. Then the people of Beth Shemesh said, who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? To whom shall he go, so that he may be rid of him? So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you. And the people of Kiriath Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. They consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. From the day that the ark was lodged at Kiriath Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of the Israel lamented after the Lord. And you think, why are we even being told this? Well, because later in the narrative, David will go to Kiriath Jearim to get the ark and bring it to Jerusalem. And so it's kind of like, okay, we had to be told this because otherwise the last time we knew the ark was in Shiloh. Who knows for sure? But it's an odd narrative that gets us there. In fact, that's what this part of your drawing is about, right? So let me hide these things quickly here, and we'll take this blank map, and then we have the ark. Here are the Philistines, and the ark will go from Shiloh to Ebenezer, and then after the Philistines capture it, it will go down to Ashdod, and then from there, it will make its way to Gath, and from there, it will make its way to Ekron, and from there, it'll make its way to Beth Shemesh, and from there, it'll finally end up at Kiriath Jearim. So that's what this picture of the ark on the illustration 14A is about. And then we pick up and you see the blank scroll. We're going to pick up on this whole idea of, okay, let's go back to what we found at the end of Joshua, where it kept, or excuse me, the end of the Judges, where it kept saying there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Because we still have judges, right? Let's read. Somebody read 1 Samuel 7, verse 3 to the end of the chapter.
Then Samuel said to all the house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Asterisk from among you. Direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So Israel put away the Baals and the Asterisk, and they served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord. They fasted that day and said, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. When the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. The people of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, and pray that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. So Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered with a mighty voice that day against the Philistines and threw them into the confusion, and they were routed before Israel. And the men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them down as far as beyond Bethkar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Jeshanah and named it Ebenezer, for he said, thus far the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel. The hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The towns that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel from Ekron to Gath, and Israel recovered their territory from the land of the Philistines. There was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. Then he would come back to Ramah, for his home was there. He administered justice there to Israel and built there an altar to the Lord.
All right, so notice the contrast here. Samuel sort of stands up as this charismatic leader to say to the people, which God are you gonna worship, right? Remember Joshua, choose this day who you're gonna worship. Samuel does a similar sort of thing. And are you gonna worship the Lord, which means putting away all the false gods that they've been worshiping? Or what are you gonna do? And they agree to put away the false gods. And so they gather to Mizpah for a religious dedication ceremony. Meanwhile, the Philistines are mustering for war. So you've got a people who are gathering, mustering, if you will, for a religious ceremony, and a people who are gathering for war. With me so far? And the people find out, of course, that the Philistines are coming, and they cry out. Samuel offers the sacrifices, seeks the Lord's help, and what happens? The Lord routs the Philistines. So here's this great victory that's not given much details in terms of numbers or anything like that, But it says that they were, the end of verse 10, they were thrown into confusion and they were routed. And then the people went out to fight against them and kind of clean up. So it's sort of one of those Joshua kinds of campaigns that we read about. And then here's where Samuel sets up a stone as a witness. Covenant language again, right? And the stone is called Ebenezer. So that's why we'll have in some of our hymns, here I raise my Ebenezer. This is this sign of God's help, a miraculous help that comes from God. It's not our strength, it's God's strength. In fact, Ebenezer means rock of my help. And so the whole sense of God being our rock is this emphasis here. And we're basically told at the end of verse 13 that from that point forward, the Philistines were, the Philistine problem was put under control. And there was no trouble with the Amorites either. And Samuel was the judge, and he would travel, he would have this circuit of places that he would go. So there's your setting. Everything's kind of nice until we get to chapter 8.
We just sang about the balm in Gilead too, did we? Like last week?
Yep, that would have been the hymn on Sunday, yeah. That will show up later in the narrative as a place where you could get this medicinal substance that would be used. So
it's literal?
Mhm.
Because we read about Gilead somewhere before, and I'm like, is that what it is?
Yeah, but I believe that'll show up a little later in the narrative as well. In Jeremiah, I think will be the reference to say, is there no balm in Gilead?
Oh.
So, but as we go from the end of chapter 7, where everything's very good, to the beginning of chapter 8, we read, when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. How's the next judge raised up? The judges were raised up because the Spirit of the Lord in several instances came upon someone, but here you have, if you will, a succession planning from father to son. And we're given the name, the firstborn Joel, the second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba, yet his sons did not follow in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. So this is not the solution yet, right? And I'll read, it says, all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, you are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations. So here's this ballot on your screen, on the screen. Are we supposed to have a king, or are we supposed to have a prince? Yes or no? It says, but the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to govern us. Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people and all that they say to do, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. Just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, for seeking me and serving other gods, so also they are doing to you. Right? Does this sound like a positive text? No. Is Samuel in favor of what the people want? No. Is God in favor of what the people want? No. So is God going to stop them? No. Right? It's this interesting judgment, right? Now then, listen to their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. So sometimes, again, we come across this pattern in scripture often, where sometimes God will seek to hinder the people from making these bad choices. But if they persist in wanting a bad choice, God will say, fine, let them have what they want. Right? That's why all of you who are mothers made your children wanted a sip of this or a puff of that or whatever, right? You hear the story of the child who wants to get a smoke of a cigarette, and so mom or dad makes them smoke a whole pack and they get sick or whatever. Anyway, so Samuel reported all these words to the people who are asking, and he said, these will be the way of the king, the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground, and some to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. And what's interesting about what was just described in this section, when we get 3 kings down the road to Solomon, we're going to see many of these things coming into fruition, right? But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, no, we are determined to have a king over us, so that we may also be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles. When Samuel heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, listen to their voice and set a king over them. Samuel then said to the people of Israel, each of you return home. So here it sounds a very negative viewpoint of kings, right? But as we go into this next section, we get quite a different kind of representation. And it's a story about Saul, who is a Benjaminite, and who's rather good looking. And he is, as it says at the end of verse 2 of chapter 9, stands head and shoulders above others, right? So he's a foot taller than other people around him. And how his father had some donkeys that wandered off, right? And so his father said, hey, take a servant along, go find the donkeys. And so he started looking for the donkeys and going all over the place, and they couldn't find the donkeys. And it got to the point of being so far into this, verse 5, that the servant he's taken along with him said, we better go back. Or Saul says, we better go back, or Dad's going to start worrying about me more than the donkeys. But the servant said, well, there's a man of God in this town. He's held in honor, and whatever he says comes true. Let's go there. And Saul says, okay, well, if we go see this man of God, what are we going to give him? We've eaten all our provisions, right? And the servant says, well, I happen to have this little quarter shekel here. I kind of keep it with me. It's my good luck shekel or whatever it might be. He says, we can offer this. And so verse 9 gives you again a sense that this narrative is being written sometime after the event occurred, because it says, well, by the way, back in those days, they would talk about going to see a seer. So that's how come they're calling him a seer, because now we would call them prophets, but that's something different, so you get the sense of that's playing out. And so they go, all right? And somebody pick up in verse 11, chapter 9.
Climbing the hill to the town, they met some young women coming out to draw water. So Saul and his servant asked, is the seer here today? Yes, they replied, stay right on this road. He is at the town gates. He has just arrived to take part in a public sacrifice up at the place of worship. Hurry and catch him before he goes up there to eat. The guests won't begin eating until he arrives to bless the food. So they entered the town, and as they passed through the gates, Samuel was coming out toward them to go up to the place of worship. Now the Lord had told Samuel the previous day, about this time tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him to be the leader of my people Israel. He will rescue them from the Philistines, for I have looked down on my people in mercy and have heard their cry. When Samuel saw Saul, wow, the Lord said, that's the man I told you about. He will rule my people. Just then Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and asked, could you please tell me where the seer's house is? I am the seer, Samuel replied. Go up to the place of worship ahead of me. We will eat there together in the morning, and in the morning I will tell you what you want to know and send you on your way. And don't worry about those donkeys, they were lost for 3 days ago, for they have been found, and I am here to tell you that you and your family are the focus of all of Israel's hopes. Saul replied, but I'm only from the tribe of Benjamin and the smallest tribe of Israel. And my family is the least important of all the families of that tribe. Why are you talking like this to me? And Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall and placed them at the head of the table, honoring them above the 30 special guests. Samuel then instructed the cook to bring Saul the finest cut of meat, the piece that had been set aside for the guest of honor. So the cook brought the meat and placed it before Saul. Go ahead and eat it, Samuel said. I was saving it for you even before I invited these others. So Saul ate with Samuel that day. When they came down from the place of worship and returned to town, Samuel took Saul up to the roof of the house, prepared a bed for him there. At daybreak the next morning, Samuel called to Saul, get up, it's time you were on your way. So Saul got ready and he and Samuel left the house together. When they reached the edge of town, Samuel told Saul to send his servants on ahead. After the servant was gone, Samuel said, stay here, for I have received a special message for you from God.
All right, and here you get a sense, depending on how your Bible puts the paragraphs, that again, the chapters aren't always in the best of spots. Does this sound like a positive or negative narrative to you? This one has a very different spirit, and something that's important to point out in verse 16. You might have the word ruler or leader. Do any of you have the word prince? So what's interesting is there's two words that get used, and more modern translations go with the word ruler, which is an okay rendering of the Hebrew word. But the challenge is when you talk about a prince, then you know there's a king. And so the older translations use the word, translated it prince, because you see, if God appoints a prince on earth, there can still be a king in heaven. And whenever that word gets used, the flavor of this appointed leader, this anointed leader, is always positive and favorable. When the word king gets used, like we saw in chapter 8, it can be certainly negative, but there will also be times in the narrative when the word king can be positive. So that's why this little ballad here has king, prince. But what happens to Saul? Keep reading.
Samuel anoints Saul as king. When Samuel took a flask of olive oil and poured it over Saul's head, he kissed Saul and said, I am doing this because the Lord has appointed you to be the ruler over Israel, his special possession. When you leave me today, you will see two men beside Rachel's tomb at Zelzah on the border of Benjamin. They will tell you that the donkeys have been found and that your father has stopped worrying about them and is now worried about you. He is asking, have you seen my son? When you get to the oak of Tabor, you will see three men coming toward you who will be on their way to worship God at Bethel. One will be bringing 3 young goats, another will have 3 loaves of bread, and the third will be carrying a wineskin full of wine. They will greet you and offer you 2 of the loaves, which you are to accept. When you arrive at Gibeah of God, there where the garrison of the Philistines is located, you will meet a band of prophets coming down from the place of worship. They will be playing a harp, a tambourine, a flute, and a lyre, and they will be prophesying. At that time, the Spirit of the Lord will come powerfully upon you, and you will prophesy with them. You will be changed into a different person. After these signs take place, do what must be done, for God is with you. Then go down to Gilgal ahead of me. I will join you there to sacrifice burnt offerings and peace offerings. You must wait for 7 days until I arrive and give you further instructions.
Okay, so at the end, this all sounds very positive, right? And in fact, those things that Samuel predicted to happen are exactly what happened. But hang on to that part about where he says, wait for me for 7 days. And I'll tell you what comes next. So as Saul gets home, these things have all taken place. He doesn't tell his uncle anything about what's going on. But now we get, we'll jump ahead to verse 17 of chapter 10. And somebody read through verse, let's see, verse 24.
Samuel summoned the people to the Lord of Mizpah and said to them, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought you up, Israel, out of Egypt, and I rescued you from the land of the Egyptians and from the land of all the kingdoms that were opposing you. But today you have rejected your God, who saves you from all your calamities and your distresses. And you have said, no, but set a king over us. Now there, present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your clans.
Sound positive or negative? Now it's negative again. Keep going.
Then Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel near, and the tribe of Benjamin was taken by Lot. He brought the tribe of Benjamin near by its families, and the family of the Metrotites was taken by Lot. Finally, he brought the family of the Metorites near man by man, and Saul and the son of Kish was taken by Lot. But when they sought him, he could not be found. So they inquired again of the Lord, did the man come here? And the Lord said, see, he has hidden himself among the baggage. Then they ran and brought him from there. When he took his stand among the people, he was head and shoulders taller than any of them. Samuel said to all the people, do you see the one whom the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people. And all the people shouted, long live the king.
Sound familiar, right? Long live the king. That's what people are supposed to say. Comes right out of the Bible. Okay, keep going.
Samuel told the people the rights and duties of the kingship, and he wrote them in a book and laid them up before the Lord. Then Samuel sent all the people back to their homes. Saul also went to his home at Gibeah, and with him went warriors whose hearts God had touched. But some of the worthless fellows said, how can this man save us? They despised him and brought him no present, but he held his peace.
All right, so now we have from that private anointing ceremony, a very public one, and we get introduced at the end of chapter 10 to this Ammonite king who is kind of brutal, right? And so it's that same, remember, this is really an overlap of the judges, right? So it's that same theme of how the people are being oppressed by these different peoples. And in this instance, this said no one was left. This is verse, 28 and a half anyway. No one was left of the Israelites across the Jordan whose right eye, Nahash, king of the Ammonites, had not gouged out. But there were 7,000 men who had escaped from the Ammonites and had entered Jabesh Gilead. So there's that little town we ran across back in the book of Judges where they wiped out. That was the one town that didn't show up to fight against the Benjaminites. So they wiped out all the men. They had 400 women left that became wives to Benjamites. Okay, so that's going to play in here. So that's sort of your, meanwhile, here's this part of this story. And chapter 11 picks up about how that king went up to fight against Jabesh Gilead. And Jabesh Gilead realized they could not withstand that battle. So they asked for terms of peace. And he says, fine, here are your terms of peace. You surrender to me and I won't destroy you. But as proof that you have surrendered to me, we're going to gouge out your right eye. And in a story that still doesn't quite make sense to me, the people say, well, tell you what, give us 7 days to see if we can find somebody to rescue us. And if that happens, then we won't submit, we'll fight you instead. And this guy apparently is so cocky, he says, go for it, right? Because he's the big boss in the land, right? And so word gets to Saul. Saul chops up his animal, sends it out to the people in parts, and they go back and they defeat the king, right? And so Saul, as he, sort of the first part of his kingly rule is rescuing the people of Jabesh Gilead. And again, if you've read the narrative and or read the chapter, you see that at the end of Saul's life, after he's been killed and his sons have been killed, it'll be the men of Jabesh Gilead who go and take Saul's body and give it a more proper burial than the ignominious death that he takes. And so that's kind of what happens in chapter 11. In chapter 12, we have Samuel starting to fade away. Let's read, we'll spend a little time with that, because all of a sudden it's going to go downhill fast with Saul. Somebody pick up chapter 12, just read the chapter. Fast reader, that's you, Heidi. Everybody take a breath. This is going to be your only breath. I used to tease Gail in the church office because she reads very fast too. Sure.
Samuel's farewell address. Then Samuel addressed the people again. I have done as you asked and given you a king. I have selected him ahead of my own sons, and I stand here, an old gray-haired man. I have served as your leader since I was a boy. Now tell me, as I stand before the Lord and before his anointed one, whose ox or donkey have I stolen? Have I ever cheated any of you? Have I ever oppressed you? Have I ever taken a bribe? Tell me, and I will make right whatever I have done wrong. No, they replied, you have never cheated or oppressed us in any way. You have never even taken a single bribe. The Lord and his anointed one are my witness, Samuel declared, that you can never accuse me of robbing you. Yes, it is true, they replied. It was the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron, Samuel continued, who brought you and your ancestors out of the land of Egypt. Now stand here quietly before the Lord as I remind you of all the great things the Lord has done for you and your ancestors. When the Israelites were in Egypt and cried out to the Lord, he sent Moses and Aaron to rescue them from Egypt and to bring them into the land. But the people soon forgot about the Lord their God, so he let them be conquered by Sisera, and the general of the Hazar's army, and by the Philistines, and the king of Moab. Then they cried to the Lord again, and confessed, we have sinned by turning away from the Lord and worshiping the images of Baal and Asherah. But we will worship you, and you alone, if you will rescue us from our enemies. Then the Lord said to Gideon, Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel to save you, and you lived in safety. But when you were afraid of Nahash and the king of Ammon, you came to me and said, you want a king to reign over you, even though the Lord your God was already your king. All right, here is the king you have chosen. Look him over. You asked for him, and the Lord has granted your request. Those aren't challenge words. Now if you will fear and worship the Lord and listen to his voice, and if you do not rebel against the Lord's commands, and if you and your king follow the Lord your God, then all will be well. But if you rebel against the Lord's commands and refuse to listen to him, then his hand will be as heavy upon you as it was upon your ancestors. Now stand here and see the great thing the Lord is about to do. You know that it does not rain at this time of the year during the wheat harvest. I will ask the Lord to send thunder and rain today, and then you will realize how wicked you have been in asking the Lord for a king. Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain, and all the people were terrified of the Lord and of Samuel. Pray to the Lord for your God, the Lord your God for us, or we will die, they cried out to Samuel. For now, we have added to our sins by asking for a king. Don't be afraid, Samuel reassured them. You have certainly done wrong, but make sure now that you worship the Lord with all your heart and you don't turn your back on him in any way. Don't go back to worshiping worthless idols that cannot help or rescue you. They really are useless. The Lord will not abandon his chosen people, for that would dishonor his great name. He made you a special nation for himself. As for me, I will certainly not sin against the Lord by ending my prayers for you. And I will continue to teach you what is good and right, but be sure to fear the Lord and sincerely worship him. Think of all the wonderful things he has done for you. But if you continue to sin, you and your king will be destroyed.
All right. So favorable toward kings, unfavorable. Not so favorable, right? And yet, even in the midst of that, God's saying, yeah, you screwed up, but if I'm going to be with you. And this kind of, again, covenant renewal, similar to what Joshua did at Shechem at the end. And then as we move over into kind of a more kingly account of Saul, we hear he was how old? We don't know. He's blank years old. And he reigned blank and 2 years. So this is the text is corrupt. We don't have the information. And so most Bibles just kind of put this in like that. And there are some guesses that people make, but we really don't know. What's that? Oh, does yours have 30 and 42? Okay. Yeah.
Asterisks to say some things have it as a blank in some people.
Yeah. So depending on which way your Bible tries to help you sort through this, there's there. But now you begin to hear about the battles, because that's what kings are supposed to do. Kings are supposed to fight on behalf of their people. And so we're told how Saul has chosen some to fight, and his son Jonathan is there, and that Jonathan, verse 3, defeated the Philistines, and they're gonna, have this big giant attack coming. In verse 5, the Philistines mustered to fight 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen. And meanwhile, the Israelites are looking at this growing Philistine army and are starting to get more and more afraid and more nervous. And we're told that Saul waited 7 days. That's in verse 8. This is what Samuel had told him, wait the 7 days. But Samuel didn't get there in time. And Saul's watching some of his troops begin to just kind of self-desert. And Saul says in verse 9, bring me the offering. The one for the burnt offering, the one for the well-being offerings, right? Whose job is it to offer offerings? It's the priests. It's not the king. And it's just, again, you read this, and of course it says, as soon as he finished, Samuel arrived, right? And Saul goes, good, I'm glad you're here. And Samuel says, what have you done? Right? And Saul says, well, I saw the people slipping away, and that you didn't get here when you said you were going to get here, right? And I saw the Philistine armies getting bigger. And so I said, holy smokes, I better do something here. And Samuel says to Saul, verse 13, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. The Lord would have established your kingdom forever, but now it will not continue, right? So how long does Saul get to be king? Well, not very long, at least in terms of the broadness of time, right? And notice what it says next. But now your kingdom will not continue. The Lord has sought out. What's the phrase? A man after his own heart. Well, we'll spend a whole unit looking at this man after his own heart, and we will wrestle with what in the world does it mean to say someone is a man after his own heart. But the Lord has appointed him to be leader, ruler, right? Prince, depending on how it gets translated, because you have not kept the commandment of the Lord, right? So this is not good, right? So here's the first narrative that has Saul eventually losing power. His son Jonathan does have a little campaign that has some promise to it, but it's interesting that while God's name is referenced in here, Jonathan never actually says, hey, God, should I do this or not? He just sort of presumes that if it goes well, God's on his side. This is a common human trait, right? That we don't necessarily ask for God's leadership, but we tell God what to do. That kind of happens to us from time to time. And So that's kind of what's going on in chapter 14. And in the meantime, we're told that Saul says, you know what, we need to not eat anything in this fight. And Jonathan, of course, doesn't hear it and eats the honey that he finds on the ground. And the people will stand up to rescue him. But so there's some of that. So we're going to kind of skip through chapter 14. And then let's go to chapter 15. And Sherry, you want to read it all? Chapter 15, 1 to 9? You're kind of hiding back there.
That's. Chapter 15.
Yeah, chapter 15.
Lord, I would appreciate, what they did and, posting this. I'm going to pack Pamela and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, and I will make some sheep and one donkey. So Saul summoned the people and numbered them in Thailand, 300,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 soldiers of Judah. Saul came to the city of the Amalekites and laid it in wait for King David. Saul said to the Kenites, "Lo, me, withdraw from among the Amalekites, for I will destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the people of Israel when the king upon them." So the Kenites withdrew from the Amalekites. Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. He took King David of the Amalekites alive, but utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. Saul and the people spared Agag and the belt of the sheep and of the cattle and of the fatling and lamb and all that was valuable and would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless they utterly destroyed.
So this is a kind of closing story to when they first were getting ready to enter into the promised land and the Amalekites fought against them. And so a kind of a curse was put on the Amalekites, saying that they've got to be completely wiped out. So Saul's given the instruction to go ahead and do some of that. And he does attack this one place, but he saves some things, right? Saves the king and the best of the sheep and the cattle. And so this is going to be their second rejection. Keep going, 10 through 16.
The regret that I may Saul king, but he has turned back and followed me and has not carried out. Samuel was angry and cried out to the Lord all night. Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, and Samuel told Saul went to Carmel, where he sat up behind himself. And on returning, he passed down to Gilgal. When Samuel came to Saul, Saul said to him, "May you be blessed by the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord." And Samuel said, "What then is leading the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of cattle out of here?" Saul said, "For they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the death of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord their God. But the rest we have utterly destroyed." And Samuel said to Saul, "Stop. I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night." He replied, "Speak." Samuel said, "Though you are little in your own eyes, are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king of Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and said, 'Go, utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed.' Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoils and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord?" Saul said to Samuel, "I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me. I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. And from the spoil, the people took sheep and cattle, productive the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." And Samuel said, "As the Lord has great delight Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obedience to the voice of the Lord? Surely to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat offering. For the rebellion is no less a sin than the nation. And stubbornness is like iniquity and ungodliness. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from doing things.
Okay, I'll stop you there. This is, there are painful leadership lessons in these verses. That are there, right? Saul thought he had a better idea than what his instructions were. And it appears, if you take it just at face value, that Saul had good intent. He said, well, we are going to eventually destroy all these things, but we think it would be great to destroy some of them by offering up them as sacrifice to God. God said, I don't want that. It's not what I asked for, right? So, I mean, it's this connection, right? A couple of lines in here where verse 17 says, though you are little in your own eyes, are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? That's a good verse for leaders to listen to. Then verse 22, as the Lord has great delight in burnt offerings, as in obedience, right? Obeying is better than sacrificing. And rebellion is like divination or sorcery, some translations might say. Stubbornness is like idolatry. Us Germans need to hear that verse once in a while. Perhaps others too. Okay. Take great pride in my stubbornness. Well, that's not such a good thing, right? And of course, what happens now, Saul will say, I've sinned, I've transgressed, right? I pray, pardon me, Samuel, and go with me. Samuel says, I won't. As Samuel turns to go away, Saul grabs a hold of his robe, it tears. And when that happens, Samuel says, see, God has tore it away from you. But when he begs and pleads for him to go with him, he does. And then kind of if you read it, pretty nasty. They bring the king forward. Samuel gets a sword and chops him into bits. It's ugly, nasty stuff, right? And it ends with, then Samuel went to Ramah and Saul went to his house in Gibeah. And Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death. But Samuel grieved over Saul. And the Lord was sorry that he had made Saul king over Israel. And the very next verse, David, right? So here's what, and we'll do some of this stuff then together. The Ammonites come up to fight against Jabesh Gilead, and the Philistines are fighting up here. And then throughout this narrative, all these different places will appear in the story. We're not going to spend a ton of time with this, but just this map is full of names that some mean more to us than others, but we're kind of traveling all over the territory. And we're going to especially see in these blue little circles and ellipses and things that are being drawn that Saul and David, you're going to watch David slowly go up on the rise as Saul is starting his downward descent and crash and burn. And the rest of the book of Samuel will have these interactions between Saul and David, sometimes happy ones, but lots of times very in opposition to each other. And we'll get a chance to read a little bit, but we won't read all of them here. But let's read about the anointing of David as king. So somebody else can pick up and read chapter 16, verses 1 through 13.
The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him from being king over Israel. Fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears of it, he will kill me. And the Lord said, Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me the one whom I name to you. Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, do you come peaceably? He said, peaceably I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sacrificed Jesse and his sons and invited them to sanctify Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, surely the Lord anointed is now before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. He said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen any of these. Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but he's keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes. He sent and brought him in. Now he was a ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. The Lord said, rise and anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Samuel then set out and went to Ramah.
So the anointing of David, right? Sounds like a wonderful beginning and ends with these incredible words that the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David, right? And was with him from that day forward. We also have in verse 7 that another, again, good leadership or just basic text that God doesn't look at things the way we look at things, right? We tend to look on the outward, God looks on the inward. And so here now emerges David for the first time in the narrative. And as David rises to prominence, Saul will crash and burn. In fact, the very next verses make that really clear, right? And perhaps even troubling, right? Because you have the Spirit of the Lord going from Saul, it leaves Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him, right? These are not necessarily easy readings. And in fact, what follows in the subsequent chapters is challenging in terms of kind of putting it together in a coherent way. Because when this tormenting spirit comes on Saul and makes him feel awful, they decide that they need to find someone who can play nice music and somebody who's got a nice singing voice that can kind of soothe and calm him. And who do they choose? David. But later on in the narrative, we're going to have Saul look at David and say, who is this guy? I don't even know who this guy is. So it's hard sometimes to piece all these things together. But David comes into Saul's care at this point and apparently has the ability with his music and voice to help that evil spirit leave him, it says at the end of verse 23, but it seems to keep coming back. So who knows exactly what's going on? Chapter 17, of course, takes us back to our Sunday school days when we hear about David and Goliath. And you will point out later on in the narrative that the Bible also references someone else who kills Goliath. And then later on, it'll say, well, that wasn't Goliath, that was somebody like Goliath. But anyway, you've got David stepping forward. And so some of these early narratives have the boy David becoming the young man David, becoming the grown-up David, and how he can hardly do anything wrong. And we'll follow through with more David next time. But here, again, the Philistines are gathering troops, and Goliath is the champion, and David is the one who comes out and fights against him. Saul wants to give him his armor, and David can't do that because they don't fit him right. He's not used to it. And so the whole chapter then is about David and fighting Goliath. So you're pretty familiar with that. Then in chapter, and of course, at the end of chapter 17, that's where Saul said, "Who is this guy anyway?" And they said, "Well, that's David." It's like, I don't know how you put it together, but now in chapter 18, Saul's son, Jonathan, and David become kind of lifelong bosom BFS friends, whatever, BFF? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm not very good at that stuff. So anyway, but they become bosom buddies, as they would say back in my day. And but along with this is that verse in 7 where it talks about Saul has killed his thousands and David 10,000. So now Saul is starting to develop this jealousy, and this is going to get bad there, right? Verse 9 is rather ominous. Saul eyed David from that day on. And in fact, in the very next narrative, Saul tries to kill him. And he was supposed to have given David his oldest daughter as a prize for killing Goliath. That didn't happen. But when he found out his second daughter, Michal, had feelings for David, he gets that done, right? But David had to win something in order to win her hand. Remember what it was? Yeah, 104 skins, which is perhaps Saul's way of thinking. If he tries to kill 100 Philistines, one of them's going to kill him. David comes back with 200, right? So again, you get these narratives that Saul looks worse and worse and worse and worse. But Jonathan speaks up for David, and Michal helps him to escape. We don't know exactly when that escape happens. Some suggest that might be on his marriage night. And that because, again, I'll get too far in the narrative, but when we get to the end of the David cycle, you will find that Michal, who has great feelings for him, that turns into great loathing for him. And she will never have children, which of course means there's no descendant of Saul of Saul through that daughter. But Jonathan and David, again, their friendship is described in great detail in chapter 20. And then David has to go on the run. It's no longer safe for him to be anywhere close. And in fact, Saul got so angry when he felt Jonathan was covering up for David that he even threw the spear at his own son. And so then this sends David on the run. And so in chapter 21 and chapter 22 and chapter 23, it keeps going for the rest of this first Samuel cycle. It's Saul often trying to chase David down and find him and kill him, and David narrowly escaping, or the Philistines have a battle and that calls Saul away from the hunt. There are a couple of instances where David will have an opportunity to kill Saul while he's relieving himself or while he's sleeping. And all David does is take evidence that he could have killed him and does not do so to try and demonstrate his loyalty and trustworthiness. But this keeps kind of going back and forth and back and forth. In the midst of the narrative, Samuel will die. That's at the beginning of chapter 25. And then we meet Abigail, who's married to Nabal. And Nabal, if you read the footnotes in your Bible, is a name that means idiot. So you kind of have this humorous story of this beautiful, wise, wonderful woman married to this idiot husband. And she will eventually be the one who rescues her whole clan from David's wrath, because David was one who appears is kind of running a protection agency, protecting people, and Nabal refuses to pay for that. And so that's much of what's occurring towards the end as you work your way through Samuel. David tries to flee to the Philistines once, and then eventually he does hook himself up with King Achish of Gath, and now he's living outside the territory and supposedly a loyal vassal or servant of King Achish, and as he's going out and killing entire groups of people, which are really the Amalekites and others like that. He keeps coming back and telling him he's fighting against Hebrew towns so that he thinks he's loyal, right? And we're just kind of hitting the fast here. In chapter 28, Saul consults a medium. So let's jump there for just a minute. Chapter 28, verse 3, somebody read from that verse through verse 14.
Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his own city. Saul had expelled the mediums and the wizards from the land. The Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, not by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek out for me a woman who is a medium, so that I may go to her and inquire of her." His servant said to him, "There is a medium at Endor." So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes and went there, he and 2 men with him. They came to the woman by night, and he said, "Consult a spirit for me and bring up for me the one whom I name to you." The woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the wizards from the land. Why then are you laying a snare for my life to bring about my death?" But Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." Then the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" He answered, "Bring up Samuel for me." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Have no fear. What do you seek?" The woman said to Saul, "I see a divine being coming up out of the ground." He said to her, "What is his appearance?" She said, "An old man is coming up. He is wrapped in a robe." So Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed his face to the ground and did.
Obeisance, yeah, right. So, I mean, this is like, what? This stuff's in the Bible? I mean, they're having a seance here. I mean, what's going on? And of course, this is all naughty. You're not supposed to consult mediums or spirits or wizards, right? You're supposed to consult the Lord. And what Saul doing is he's not doing that. He's doing so, and of course, keep reading. Samuel will tell us what comes next.
And Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul answered, "I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have summoned you to tell me what I should do." Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you just as he spoke by me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you today. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me." The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel, and there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. The woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, "Your servant has listened to you. I have taken my life in my hand and have listened to what you have said to me. Now, therefore, you also listen to your servant. Let me set you up a morsel of bread before you. Eat that you may have strength when you go on your way." He refused and said, "I will not eat." But his servants, together with the woman, urged him, and he listened to their words. So he got up from the ground and sat on the bed. Now the woman had a fatted calf in the house. She quickly slaughtered it, and she took flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened cakes. She put them before Saul and his servants, and they ate. Then they rose and went away that night.
Okay. The next time we hear about Saul, he's gonna die. The irony in your text pointed it out in that at the beginning of the Saul story, he has a meal with Samuel the prophet. And things are on the go up. At the end of the story, as things are going down, he has a meal with a witch or with a medium. And this is and we'll talk more about this in the next couple of lessons as well. And so I want to say this carefully, that the narrative paints Saul quite often in a very negative light, in part because the narrative will paint David in an extremely positive light. But we'll be kind of trying to read between the lines, because when we dig into David, we're going to see lots of things that they never told me about this in Sunday school, kind of stuff. And at the same time, there are little hints in here in the text that Saul was a capable leader, but from the eyes of the author, he's from the wrong tribe. The leader isn't supposed to come from Benjamin. The leader's supposed to come from Judah. So we'll pick that up some more. But at the end of this narrative, then David, who has been kind of taken under the wing of King Achish of Gath and trusted by him, the Philistines are going to muster for an all-out battle against the Israelites. And Achish is all for David being part of his military group, but the other four Philistine lords say, we're not going to take him along because we know he's a renegade Hebrew. What better way for him to get back into the good graces of his people than to turn on us and so they send him back. And all along, as this was getting closer, you read, if you had a chance, how David would send gifts back to the leaders of the tribe of Judah, because that's his own tribe. And so when David gets back home, they find out that their home has been ransacked by the Amalekites. And so everything's been taken. And his men are about ready to mutiny, but he manages to muster the troops, takes them south, finds an abandoned slave whom they use to locate where these people are. They go wipe them out, gather all their stuff, reclaim all their items. They get back home. And of course, that narrative gives David, if you will, a very clear path to say, I was not involved in killing Saul. Because in chapter 31, Saul is killed. And when we come back into our next section, we'll get a chance to see how then David becomes the next king. But it's not a smooth, immediate transition. So let's look. There's, I think, not much more in our pictures per se, but turn, if you will, into page 40, where? I'm gonna show you a couple of things here. Go to page 46. Page 46 is where it talks about, and I'll pull that picture back up for a minute. I go the right direction here. Page 46 is where it talks about this part. Oh, come on, Jeff. I gotta do all this stuff backwards there. Where we get the sense of king being sometimes positive, sometimes negative, prince, ruler, leader, different ways it gets translated, is always a positive sense. And then what I kind of did less elegantly on pages 47 through 50, you have these little points as we're just kind of following the story along and seeing this, if you will, cat and mouse game between David and Saul. Point 20 on the middle of page 49 references the fact of this book-ended meal with Saul, how he eats with Samuel, the prophet, when things are good, but at the end, he eats with this witch at Endor. But that last sentence at the bottom of page 49 is really emphasized in that section, that David's total success, right? Everything David touches seems to go well. In fact, we didn't look at this specifically, but by the time we get to the end of Samuel, 1 Samuel, David has two wives, Abigail we reference, but Ahinoam is the other, and that happens to be the same name as Saul's wife. Nobody can, you can't say specifically that he married Saul's wife, but it's possible. And so some Bible scholars will wonder about that. But there is this, again, in that day and age, and still in some places in the world today, the way you demonstrate that you have taken control over the person you have succeeded is you take control of the harem. And yet Saul has one wife and one concubine. When we get to David, there's going to be several wives and other women that he does things with. And then by the time we get to his son Solomon, we will have 700 wives and 300 concubines. So, I mean, it starts to get really sort of out of control. But David is built up. And then at the very end, and here's where I'd like to look at it with you in chapter 31 of 1 Samuel. We'll end with this section before we jump to our prayers. So if someone wants to read chapter 31, go for it.
Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines, and many fell on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan and Abinadab and
Malchishua,
the son of Saul. The battle pressed hard upon Saul. The archers found him, and he was badly wounded by them. Then Saul said to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, so that these uncircumcised may not come and thrust me through and make sport of me." But his armor bearer was unwilling, so he was terrified. So Saul took his own sword and fell upon him. Then his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, and also fell upon his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together on the same day. When the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook their towns and fled, and the Philistines came and occupied them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the houses of the idols into the people. They put his armor in the temple at Astarte, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. But when the inhabitants of Japheth Gilead heard that the Philistines had done, heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men sent out, traveled all night long and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan. They came to Jebush and buried them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days.
So the ends with a rather unpleasant end for Saul, and his sons, and as they are decapitated, and the heads are carried off as victory celebrations. The bodies are nailed to a wall. The men of Jabesh Gilead, they're way up here in the north again. They go, travel, grab those bodies, bring them back, burn them, bury them, and have a time of mourning. And so you have Saul's life kind of bookended with Jabesh Gilead in this as well. So look for just a moment in your question book. On page 21. This is what similarities do you detect between the Saul-David narrative and those that relate to royal houses and political parties throughout history? It's not always a happy transference of power, right? And again, what we read here, while it's not at all pleasant, does seem to repeat in human history quite regularly, doesn't it? Interestingly enough, verse 2 says the power struggle between Saul and David contains some brutal details. What power did Jesus use to build his kingdom and to capture people's hearts, right? The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. So these contrasts are going to play an important part. And then sort of the tongue-in-cheek question, right? When people become aware of the real character of those who play a central role, how might they feel about books for children titled Great Heroes of the Bible? How many biblical characters are heroes? One, right? So we'll spend some time with that, but just wanted to point those ironic ones out. Let's join in our prayers and then we'll set you free here. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. So I'm gonna hit a couple of stop buttons here.